you continue to bless us this night. In Jesus' name, amen. the one who never leaves the other one behind, God. Thank you for always just being there for us, God. Thank you for just everything you've done for us, God. Thank you for sending your son, Lord, to die on the cross to pay for our sins, God. God, you loved us so much that you would do it again 100 billion times, God, and even more than that to save us, God. Lord, we thank you for that. We're so grateful, God. Thank you for just being who you are, God. Lord, I pray that you just give us the boldness to go out and share your word, God, with all those other people, Lord. We don't really have an excuse to not do it, because the stars were made to worship, so shall we, God. The oceans roar your greatness, God, so shall we. So, God, I pray that you would just give us the boldness, God. Give us the heart for all those other people, God. We need you, Lord, and so do we, God. It's in your most precious name we pray. Amen. Why don't you go ahead and greet someone next to you?
Cleaning back in your bed. Dad said you need to be in the corner.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Evening, Pastor.
Let's get through the bulletin first, and then we'll get into tonight's message. So, if you'd like to get a bulletin, raise your hand, or just grab it on your way out so you know what's going on. Not a whole lot going on this month up front. We just had a wonderful time on New Year's Eve here at the church. I thought that the Lord ministered to us and really blessed us with his presence. And I'm excited at what God is going to do. We are going to host a week of prayer and fasting, starting January 14th through the 20th. So it's a time where we allow God to just minister to us as we surrender to him. We deny the flesh, and then we enter into his presence with thanksgiving. We'll have a few songs before, and then we'll begin in prayer. Now, the question is always asked, are we to fast all day long? That's up to you. If the Lord leads you to fast for 7 days, that'd be wonderful. And it would probably be a great experience for you to fast and experience that. You do get in touch with the Lord a little bit more because you're denying your flesh and asking him to minister to you. But if you can't do that, then fast something else. I suggest, fasting a certain meal. Or here's one for you, and it might be the hardest thing you ever do. How about fasting from TV for a week? Right? Just don't watch TV for a whole week. See what kind of withdrawals you go through. Or your phone. Stay off of Facebook for a whole week, And if they had only one of those little features where you can put praying and fasting will return soon.
Post it on the public thing.
Yeah, there you go, and just leave it there. Yep. So we're really going to seek the Lord as we do every year through our prayer and fasting, and just see what God does. And we're hoping that he'll begin to do a new work here in our little church. Hidden away in this dark little corner of Mariloma. But I love it. It's where he has me. It's where he has you. And I hope that you'll stay with us and continue on for many, many, many years. So let's ask the ushers to come forward, and we will collect of the tithe and offerings. Let's pray. We thank you, Lord, for your beautiful grace. Father, how your grace has touched us deeply, Lord.
Yes.
How it has moved us, Lord God, to seek after your righteousness, Lord. To seek after your character. To know you and to want and desire to be like you, Lord. That's only through your grace and your mercies, Father. May you continue to give us that hunger and that desire, Lord, to know you. Lord, give us new desires this year. Take us back to our first love, as Revelation says, Father, where we were so in love with you. Lord, we couldn't get enough of you. We were in church on Sunday and Wednesdays, Lord. We took opportunities to minister to other people. We prayed and we fasted. And we desired to serve you in any capacity because we were just in love with you, Lord. Return us, Lord, to that first love, Lord. We need to go back for our own sake and our own benefit, for the benefit of our loved ones and for our children, Lord, to see the power of God working in our lives, Lord. To see the hunger in our lives, Lord. They need to see that, Lord, so that the next generation will hunger just as much, if not more, Lord. But Lord, if they don't have that example, Father, then they're going to do worse than the last generation. And so I pray, Lord, I beg you, Father, do not allow this to happen. Wake up the church, Father, that we may see that the future is held in your hands, Lord. And it's very bright, because the darker it is in this world, the brighter the light shines. We pray that you will be blessed by our offerings to you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we're in Exodus chapter 21, so let's turn our Bibles there. Some very practical teaching here this evening. Our theme tonight is circumstantial laws. Circumstantial laws. You know, Jesus summed up the laws in two ways for the scribes, right? In Matthew chapter 22:37, he said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And this is the first and the great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said this, on these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets. So he took the 10 commandments and he divided them, well, not right in half, but a third and then 2/3. The first half dealing with God and how we ought to love God, and the second 2/3, how we ought to love one another. And how would you define loving your neighbor? That's a good question to ask yourself. We hear the word love your neighbor, but what does that mean to love your neighbor? And God is really defining that commandment dealing with humanity here in this chapter, actually the next 3 chapters. He's going to be dealing with honoring your father. That's dealing with humanity, right? Your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet. Those are all commandments that are dealing with humanity, with our neighbors. Well, who's our neighbor? We're all neighbors, aren't we?
Yes.
It's not speaking literally your neighbor right next door to you, but it's the neighbor that's next to you as you're walking into Target store. It's the neighbor that's sitting right next to you as you're in the car, or he's in front of you or in back of you, and either you're honking or you're going too slow. You know, that's your neighbor there. And yes, it could be the person that lives next door to you. That is our neighbors. And how do we treat our neighbors? It's something that we need to get back to. I really believe that. So in the next few chapters, God will give a practical explanation of these laws. What does the law say about having servants? What does the law say about how you treat those servants? What does the law say about violating one another? And even laws against animals that destroy your neighbor's properties. What are those laws, and how do we use them to glorify our God. So what does the law say about having servants? You know, and he will give this practical instructions on how to purchase a free servant even, or how to handle intentional and unintentional violence. What if your neighbor's animals come to your house and begin to destroy things? And God is establishing precedent here actually for a legal system for Israel. He's setting up a court, a judicial system for them. Now that they've had the laws, now he's going to use these 12 judges, or judges that Moses is assigned to help govern over the people. They'll now set up a court and they'll deal with these kind of issues. So 3 points tonight: the law concerning servants, the law concerning violence, and the law concerning animals. This is very practical. And I think that we have to keep it that way. Because we live in a world today where there's not a whole lot of love for one another. It's a very selfish world. We think about ourselves first. I was sharing this morning at our Devo 30 how the Lord has been revealing to me. He's been, he tests our heart. He tests us so that we see what's in us. And I was sharing, I'm just being vulnerable and transparent here. And I think if you've been here long enough, you know that I share all my faults. But my mom's real sick right now, and she's at our house, and we all know that. And I am learning that I can serve her so easily, because I love my mom, and I really never spent a whole lot of time with her. Virginia and I got married very young, left the house, raised our own kids. So we didn't spend a lot of time with even either one of our parents. In fact, we probably went years before we even saw her parents. And it's amazing how long we went without seeing them. And now that our fathers have passed away, our mothers are with us, and now we see them every day. And I'm finding that it's easy to serve my mom because I see that she's getting old. She's, for some of you, maybe 78 is not too old, but I'm seeing her deteriorate. She's sick right now, and she's it literally looks shorter, smaller, and she looks weaker, and her mind. And so I'm always walking in the room. Mom, are you okay? Do you need anything? She goes, I'm hungry. I go, what do you want? You want me to go get you something? You want me to make you something? What? No, I'll just make something myself. Are you sure? I can do it, and I'll do it, or I'll go buy her something. I feel like a burrito from, Casa Dia over there, one of those Chile Verdes. I'm like, I'll go over there and I'll go get it. And I do. I just get in my car and I go and I get it. And then the Lord starts revealing to me, why can't you do that with other people in your lives? I'm like, I don't know. Why does it seem like it's a chore or a burden to do it for others? And it's really the fact that I don't love them as much as I'm loving my mother at this time. And it all stems to that loving your neighbor as you love yourself. You know what I'm talking about, right? When someone asks you, there's this commercial that I saw the other day, and it's hilarious to me because this has been going on for generations and generations, But there's this couple sitting down, and the husband sees some food on her plate as they're in a restaurant or whatever, and he reaches over and grabs some, and he eats it, and she's like, oh, here, pushes the plate over, get some more if you want. And so then he's eating and she's eating, and then she reaches over to grab his plate. He grabs it away and says, that's mine. How many generations has that been going on? Have you ever felt that as a man? I'm speaking to men right now. I have, where I am hungry. This is my food, and my wife's trying to stick her fork in my food. I'm like, leave my food alone. I'm hungry. And yet she will willingly give me her food. And I'm thinking, wow. I'm not any different than any other man, and they're showing this on a commercial, so that tells me that our society understands this thing of serving one another, of loving one another as neighbors. And so as we go through these are very practical things. And these are just the beginning of what God wants us as Christians to reflect to this world, how we treat one another. When you are going through Starbucks, do you open the door for someone and let them go in first? And they say, thank you, appreciate that. Wow, that's unusual. Because normally they just walk in and they shut the door as they're walking in, right? But taking the extra step to loving your neighbor, taking care of your neighbor, fixing your neighbor. If you break something, take care of it, repay them, help them out. These are things that we've lost. Oh, I broke your shovel. Sorry, man. Oh, too bad. Here. And then you walk away, right? Yeah, we do that. Instead of saying, I broke his shovel, running to Home Depot, buying a shovel, and say, hey, here's your shovel back. I broke yours, but here's a new one. We don't do that anymore like we used to. So these are the kind of laws that God is trying to relate to Israel that they need to be doing. Now, they've been doing a lot of these laws. There's nothing that's new here for them. From the time that Adam and Eve sinned, we just see this snowball effect of sin just growing and growing, right? From all the way to Noah, where God finally says, look, man's imagination is totally corrupt. Babel, they tried to build a tower to make a name for themselves. Abel killed his brother Cain. Lamech is boasting about his killing more than Abel killed. And it's just like sin. And then God says, I'm wiping it all out, starting over. Because they didn't know how to deal with one another. It was totally selfishness. There was no love for humanity. And they were all into self. And so God starts all over. And he begins to share these rules with them and how they ought to live, how they ought to treat one another. He gives them these 10 commandments with Moses. And they're very clear commandments, honor your father and mother. But there's some going, how do I do that? What do you mean, honor your father and mother? What does that mean? Because we don't know what that means. We really don't. Okay, yeah, I'm to honor my father and mother. And I do honor my father and mother. Really? How do you show that? I don't know. I just tell you I honor them because that's what the Bible says to do, honor them. But it's like someone saying, I love you guys. I really love you. But he never has any actions or deeds that show that he loves you. So the reality is he doesn't love you. I had a boss, I share this, it's in a whole new church. I had a boss that would come to our meetings. He was a manager above our boss. He'd come to the meetings and say, I love you guys. It's all about you, keeping you working, keeping your families fed and so forth. I love you guys. I love you guys. And this was all during deregulation. And when deregulation started, he began to take equipment from the company. He took manuals from the company. And as he's walking out the door, he started his own company doing what we do and took a bunch of guys from the company as he's saying, I love you guys. But he's trying to take our jobs away from us. That's not love. That's not love. Love would have said, I'm going to stick it out with you guys. I'm going to be loyal to you guys. I'm going to be committed to you guys. I'm going to respect you guys. I'm not going to take your stuff. I'm going to take your man. And I'm not going to take a few of you so I can create my own business. And then down the road, if it grows enough, I'll just sell it back to Edison and make millions of dollars. Because that's what they do. It's all selfishness. But that's the society that we live in. So God is giving some rules, some laws in more detail here. So let's look at the laws concerning servants, because they did have servants at this time. Verse 1, these laws concerning servants, first point. Now these are the judgments. Some translations use the word rules or laws, which shall be set before them. So God is speaking to Moses, and he's telling Moses, okay, these are going to be the rules and the laws that you are to give to the people, as he's setting up this judicial system. And God gives us some practical illustrations on applying the laws towards servants here. Now, is God's practical advice a condolence on slavery? No. Because he's giving these laws, he's not necessarily condoning slavery, or he's not actually starting this whole process of slavery. What he's doing is that he's actually bringing some rules and conditions for having slaves, because they already had them. If it was God's choice, he'd probably not have slaves. But they have them, and we have free will, and they've created a system of slaves like the other nations. And so God is saying, okay, but we're not like the other nations. There's got to be some rules here, guys. You're not going to be like the other nations, mistreating your slaves. You're not going to keep them forever. You're going to give them opportunities to be free and so forth. So he's kind of putting ordinances on them to bring grace and mercy in this whole slavery system. He's not condoning it. Now, those that are out there that are atheists and political leaders, they go back and say, you want us to go back to the days of no, we're there already. But God's grace and mercy are there that you don't see. And they don't see it. So he's bringing these practical lessons for us here. Now, there were 4 basic ways that a Hebrew might become a slave to another Hebrew. And he is speaking to Hebrews here, to Jews, not to the other nations here. These rules and laws are for them. 1, in extreme poverty, they might sell their liberty. And that makes sense, right? I mean, you can't afford to eat anymore. You can't afford to live anywhere. So what do? You starve to death out in the desert somewhere? No. You go to this guy that owns a lot of land, and he's very wealthy. He said, hey, could I come work for you? Could I be your slave? Maybe just house me, just feed me, just clothe me, and I'll be your slave. Maybe you've got some debt, and he says, hey, I agree to pay your debt off. You stick with me for 6 years. That's one way. Leviticus 25:39. Or a father might sell his children to servitude. Oftentimes they sell their daughter. Maybe a rich person was interested in their daughter, so he would sell the daughter as a slave in the intent to marry this person or marry even a son. And so it was a way of marrying their daughters off into wealth. We still do that today, right? I know a person years ago. She didn't go to this church, but she was a sister of someone else. But she used to hang out in Newport Beach, looking for a rich man to take care of her for the rest of her life. You know, we do that. You know we do that. And it works. She's got a very wealthy man and a child through that man. And she's well taken care of. And even after he passes, she'll be well taken care of. So there's that purpose of being a slave. The third is the case of bankruptcy. A man might become a servant to his creditors. Look, I owe you way too much. How about if I just come and be your slave? And we'll call it even. Okay, sounds good. Or if a thief has nothing or had nothing with which to pay the proper restitution, then he became a slave. Exodus 22:3-4. So verse 2 says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. Now these rules apply to the Jewish people, as I said. And you could only keep them for 6 years, because on the 7th year God rested. It's the day of victory. It's the day that God gave peace and rest. And so 6 years they serve, and then you need to let them go. That was the requirement. Now that doesn't show cruelty. That actually shows grace, doesn't it? Because the other nations who had slaves, and they're mimicking these other nations, they had slaves, they'd keep them forever. They wouldn't ever go back home. You're my slave forever, so get used to it. Not just you, but your wife and your children, from children to children to children. Whoever born in my community, they're mine. And they're treated as property. And God said, no, you're not going to do that. For whatever reason they've sold themselves to you, you're going to let them go after 6 years. So they weren't obligated to a life term. He who comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. So apparently there were times when the whole family was part of that, and so they get married, and now the 6 years are up. Well, you can go if you want, but the relative's staying here. Oh, really? Oh, boy. Okay, now I've got a decision to make. What do I do? Well, look at verse 5. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door, into the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So there was a judicial system here. You mean, I'm free to go, but you're keeping my wife and children? I do like it here. You're a nice guy. I've learned to love you. You're fair. I've gone without. I have not gone without. I have clothes. I have food. I had everything taken care of. I'd like to stay too. Well, let's go to the judge. Let's sign all the documents and papers, and we'll take it to the doorpost. We'll put a hole in your ear, put a ring signifying it of your own free will. You're going to serve me and your family. And that's exactly what they did. They were committed at that point to that family from that point on. Now, verses 7-11 deal with the rights of female maidservants. Look at verse 7. And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself. So there's a purpose here of him purchasing her as a slave. He literally wants to marry her. And so it's a little different rules in this case. So then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And so here's the thing. His intention was to marry her. But then she says, I really don't want to marry you. Okay, well, I'm not going to get upset and mad, because, again, God is bringing grace and mercy here and order. Because in the other nations, they say, you don't want to marry me? What's your problem? You're marrying me. That's it. You're my property. Or if not, you're going to rebel. I'm selling you to other people, and you're out of here. I never want to see you again. And God's saying, no. What you will do is let her be redeemed by her family. And if they can raise the money, they will purchase her back so she can go right back to her family. You're not going to treat her that way. Tell me Christianity doesn't treat women right. It's the only religion that treats women right, that gives them the ability to be freer than what these feminists believe. Yes, I said that correctly, right? Feminists believe. I believe God gives women more freedom than even our nation does. Freedom to be who God has called them to be, and not to be what they think that they ought to be. What is so amazing is that you have this argument, and you can see the flaw and the crippleness of their thinking. I guess CNN just got busted. One of the reporters was smoking marijuana at a party, because now it's going to be legalized. So let me put a bong on, the whole mask, and laughing away. That's crazy. That's crazy. Billy Graham was calling for them to fire these people. But that's the society we live in. I'm a feminist. Free rights. Don't degrade us. We're women. And yet they'll parade topless. Doesn't make any sense at all to a person that has sense. But they're like, we're just showing you we're feminists. It's like, really? That makes no sense at all. Their thinking is totally corrupt and evil. They remind me of the days of Noah, when all they thought about was themselves. And it's sad. And God says, no, you're not going to do that. There's going to be order. There's going to be grace. There's going to be mercy. And you're not going to mistreat a woman. You're going to allow her to go back to her family respectfully. And these were the rules. And if, verse 9, and if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes, and again, we don't know what that custom of the daughters were, because he doesn't mention those rules, but there's more rules that are here that we don't know of. And by the way, saying that, sometimes when we are dealing with our neighbors, sometimes there are those gray areas, right? What do I do in this case? What do I do in this case? I borrowed my neighbor's car, and I accidentally scratched it on the side. Do I tell him or not tell him? What does the Bible say about that? I don't remember hearing anywhere, if you scratch your neighbor's car, what do you do? And we start justifying, well, I don't have to tell him. He'll never notice. Buff it up a little bit. Maybe he thinks someone else did it while he was driving. And those are the issues that we deal with, that the Bible really doesn't give us all the little details. But there are details of the customs of the daughters. And they're going to be ones of loving and merciful and gracious and peace and so forth. And not one that's going to benefit the person, but to benefit the other person. So we have to think about that when we're dealing with one another. And I think that's why Paul says in Philippians, think of others more highly than you think of yourself. He goes on and says, if he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, nor clothing, nor her marriage rights. Now these rules are dealing with polygamy. Yeah? Polygamy. God's not for it. God's not condoning it. But God is setting some rules so they don't misuse it, because they have free will. Just like we do today. And we do some strange things today. And we think it's God's grace and the liberty that he's given us. But I think sometimes God just allows us to do those things, and he sets the boundaries as we go along. Now, God doesn't agree with polygamy, as I said, nor does he condone it. He is just setting these guidelines. Now, the idea of women and women of lower classes having such rights respected by God in society was revolutionary in the age when women usually were regarded as property. So amazing. He goes on and says, if he does not do these three to her, then she shall go out free without paying money. When I was teaching in South Sudan, Now in South Sudan, polygamy is practiced there. So you can have many wives. And one of the chaplains said, Pastor Ruben, what if you have a man who becomes a Christian and he has 5 wives? What is he supposed to do? What is he supposed to do? Well, right here. If he's got 5 wives, what is he supposed to do? Verse 10. He shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. So you make sure that you take care of all 5 wives. That you feed them all, that you clothe them all, and any marriage rights. But you only have relationships with one wife. Because that is what God has taught us. That we are to be with one wife. And the 2 shall become one. So the other 4 wives are just taken care of because you lived in that type of situation. But you can't have relationships with them. Makes sense. And that's probably what God is doing here to make sure that those wives weren't discarded. Because that's what they do. We don't like you guys anymore. Sorry, you're old. Out of here. In with the new, you know. That's what the other nations were doing. And God's saying, you can't do that. That's not what Christians do. That's not what Christians do. There's a phrase that we should ask ourselves every once in a while when we're making decisions. Is that what a Christian does? Is that what God would want me to do as a believer? And chances are you're going to say, I don't think so. So you better not do it. Now, laws concerning violence, verse 12 through 14, which gives us appropriate punishment for both murderers and manslayers. Verse 12, he who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. So this is the principle of capital punishment, which, by the way, goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 9. Whoever sheds a man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. So this is a principle that God has already established with the children of Israel, because God was made in his image, and you are to respect that man. The saying always goes, you know, you abuse that woman is someone's daughter, right? She could be your daughter, but she's not my daughter, but she's somebody's daughter. Man and women are made in the image of God, and we should respect that fact, the sanctity of life itself, and the respect of one another. That's what God is teaching them here. The right for the state to legally execute is also stated in the New Testament, Romans chapter 13, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. That's why government's established, right? Now, we might get a little upset. We don't need government. We don't want government. But God has established government to keep evil away from people. Otherwise, evil will destroy people. And we see this through other nations and how they ruin societies and civilizations. He goes on and says, do you want to be unafraid of the authorities? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. That's capital punishment. So the New Testament talks about capital punishment. God says if you slay a man, you should be slain too. Don't go to the altar. Don't go to the judge. No questions. He just killed a man. Kill him. Take him to the wall. Stone him to death. However, verse 13, there's always a however, right? But there's some details to this. What if it was unintentional? What if it was an accident? What if you didn't realize what you did? So all those little details have to be taken care of. So however, if he did not lie in wait, so in other words, premeditated, but God delivered him into his hands, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. So these became cities of refuge, we'll see later on down the road, where if you committed a crime, you could actually flee to the city of refuge and find some sort of sanctuary there. Now, we misunderstood that in our society in earlier times, right? When people would literally run there thinking that I find what's the word? Where you, as long as you're there, they can't take you out and judge you. You can pretty much just live there without being touched, right? And that's not what God intended. Those places were kind of cooling down places. You can run because the brother of the guy you just killed is after you, so run to the place and then say, okay, I'm being accused of murder, hold on to me until the judge can come and decide what should be the verdict here. So it wasn't a place where you could just run and say, okay, I'm free. He can't touch me ever as long as I stay in this place. Right? No, the judge comes and says, no, you did intentionally do that. Okay, the brother can kill you now. Or it was an accident, so you can't touch him, but he needs to repay some sort of fee or whatever. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. So the altar, speaking of mercy, where you find mercy and grace from God, but you can't find it at the altar. God say, no, I'm adamant about this. He can't come to my altar and plead anything. You take him and let him die. There's no mercy here from God at all. And the principle of punishing murderers is so important to God that he denies murderers refuge in his own altar. So that's important to God. Otherwise he would not have said this. God also said that murderers defile the land. And that's true, right? Numbers 35, 31, 33, and 34. Moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death. So you shall not pollute the land where you are, because it pollutes the land when you allow a murderer to live. Go around continuing to murder people, terrorize people. They live without peace and so forth. So there's a reason for getting rid of these people. Do you know what I believe? I believe that our officials who are atheists and non-believers, I believe they don't care if murderers get set free, like the Jerry Browns. Mm-hmm. They don't care. They'll make laws to free them because we don't have enough room. Why? Because it's survival of the fittest. Let them kill as many people. That just means less people for us to feed and take care of. And that was Jacques Cousteau's. Do you remember Jacques Cousteau? His belief was that we need to get rid of people and create a less population for the resources we have. He felt that we should have like somewhere around 700,000 people on the earth, not the 7 billion that we have. That's massive genocides that he was talking about.
Who was this?
Jacques Cousteau.
Oh.
Yeah. So these are the naturalists, the environmentalists that view life that way because they're evolutionists, survival of the fittest. Isn't that what Hitler thought? What do you do when you have a people? You know that in the beginning Hitler had a problem with his generals killing Jews. They couldn't do it because they viewed Jews as human beings. So what did he do? He started this propaganda that they're less than human. And so he dehumanized them. And once the generals saw that, oh, they're less than human, they're not like us, they're apes, they're less than us, they're deformed, oh, we need to just get rid of them. And that's how he got them to do what they did in that genocide itself. So it destroys and pollutes the land. Look what it did to Germany, to Russia, and to all these other places. Armenian, I heard that whole genocide is even worse than what Hitler did to the Jews. So it's strange how we don't practice that law. And God has real heart for it. Now verses 15 through 17, laws concerning murder of a parent. Verse 15, and he who strikes his father or mother shall surely be put to death. Now, the striking here must be taken in context of verse 12, which says that he who strikes a man, so shall he die. So this is talking about a child murdering a parent. So no excuses. He should be stoned at the wall. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. So even kidnapping was considered a capital punishment. He who curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. So we see it a second time this is mentioned. That's interesting. I think it's interesting because when things are mentioned more than once, there's some emphasis there. The first time, look, you can't strike your father or mother. You can't kill them. You can't murder them. You can't poison them. You can't fake a car crash. You just can't do that. God sees it, and you'll be punished for that. And you cannot curse your father and mother. So let's get a little more detail here. You can't curse them. Don't speak to them disrespectfully. Really? Yeah. Because that's not honoring. The word honoring means esteem them highly. Esteem them highly. if a person walks into a room that you know of that is very popular, very respected in our society, there is no way that you would speak disrespectful to that person. You have a certain amount of respect. Isn't it interesting that you can speak to your parents when you're in church in front of people very nicely, very kindly, but then you go home in your own little castle and your kids can speak to parents so rudely, so arrogantly, so proudly, because they're in their own home, they feel so comfortable. I think that's where our society is at, that we have, well, like I said earlier, how did they kill the Jews? They made them less as human, desensitized them to their humanity. And that's what we've done in our nation. In fact, we've done that with everything, haven't we? Let's be free to express ourselves. What's wrong with that? Let's be free to express ourselves. So you have people that go around and say, you shouldn't feel those restraints. You can express yourself any way. You have every right. So they start expressing themselves. And now we have a country that expresses themselves freely on any subject. And that was never intended by our nation at all. That's not freedom of speech. That's hate speech. And isn't it funny that they've turned what is looked at as good as evil and what is evil as good, right? Because now if you're a Christian and you're teaching the truths of God, that's hate speech. And yet theirs is not hate speech, right? You could want so many people to be tolerant of your views, but yet you're not tolerant of their views. So that's where our nation is. I think that's what has happened in our society towards parents. You remember back in the days when children started suing their parents? Remember that? What was that, like the 80s, 90s? Right around there? This young girl decided, I'm suing my parents because I don't like the way she treats me. Took her to court and sued her. And then several other lawsuits. So again, society saying you have the right to do that as a child. The school system teaching you, don't listen to your parents, Google it, because they don't know what they're talking about. You make the choice. If you get pregnant, don't go to your parents, just go to Planned Parenthood, they'll help you out with it. So they take all the authority and power away from the parents. They dehumanize them to a certain degree, saying they're on the same level as you, as a friend, as a neighbor. They have no power or authority over you at all. Take all that away, what happens? You have dishonor to parents. And that's exactly what has happened in our society. So he who curses father or mother shall surely be put to death. The idea is of an adult child who threatens their parents through this law is severe, it's perverse, a critical foundation for a civilized society, respected between generations to come. It destroys everything. It is so critical that we don't allow it to happen because the very foundation of our world is designed on family. And yet we see our nation destroyed because of it. It also has a built-in protection for the rights of the children according to Deuteronomy chapter 21. This passage states that the parent did not have the right to carry out this punishment, but they had to bring the accused child before the elders and judges of the city, right? So again, there's the mercy, grace, and the order. You can't just go kill your kids because you said they were being disrespectful. You got to go to the judge and let them decide that for themselves. This meant that the parent, against all contemporary customs, did not have the absolute power of life or death over their children. So, as a practical matter, the judges of Israel rarely, if ever, administered death penalties in such cases, yet the child was held accountable. I find that interesting in that commentary, that we don't see too many of the Israelites enforcing that law, that they seem to have gotten away with it quite a bit. And you see it especially with King David, right? And how disrespectful his sons were against him through his lifespan. Psalms 3 talks about Absalom and how David just was so broken up inside because of his son Absalom. Very painful to go through. 18 through 19 regarding compensation for personal injury. Verse 18. If men contend with each other, and they do, we still see it today, contending with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone, or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. You notice how some of these laws we have in our own society? Isn't that interesting? Because our founding fathers took them from the Scripture and felt, hey, these are good laws for having good neighbors. This is how we ought to treat one another. This is how we ought to be respectful for one another. And so if you hit your neighbor intentionally with the shovel or something, I remember one time my neighbor was out in the... No, actually, I was out cleaning my yard. And if you know me, you know I'm an A-type personality, like things very clean. So I was actually cleaning my gutter. I was scraping up all the dirt and trash, washing it all the way down. And it always flows downhill, right? Well, my neighbor's downhill. So he's, I guess, looking through the window, and he sees me. So as I'm by the curb next to his property, washing whatever's little left, he comes out with a shovel and sticks it right there in front of me. And for a second, I thought, he's going to swing that at me. And then Virginia comes out, and she's like, what do you think you're... I'm like, Virginia, get inside, And so I just kept watering and let him, and then he grabbed a bunch of dirt and just threw it back on my side of the gutter. I didn't do anything. I wanted to wait to see what he would do. But if he would have hit me, and if I would have died, then he would have been, in this time, would have been killed himself. But if you don't die, then he pays the medical bills. And we have that today. Verse 20 through 21 regarding the beating and death of a servant. If a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. So again, God isn't condoning slavery, nor is he condoning this type of behavior, but he's setting some rules here. He's setting some rules that if you beat your servants and if he dies under his hand, then surely you'll be punished. You're not just going to get away with it like the other nations. And this shows that in ancient world, servants could be murdered by their masters and get away with it. But God wasn't going to allow that to happen with the Jewish people. He wanted them to be merciful to their servants even. Now the law of retribution. If a man fights and hurts a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. So again, not necessarily everything that the man wants, but before the judge, and then the judge determines whether it's fair and equitable for the parties. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a stripe for a stripe, a finger for a finger, a thumb for a thumb, a foot for a foot, and just go on. In other words, whatever they do, then you can do back. But don't do more. God's actually giving grace and mercy here. Because in the other nations, and really, and you know this to be true, when someone hurts you, you want to hurt them back even more. That's our normal tendency. Oh, you hurt me? You just wait and see what I'm going to do. You think that was hurting me? Oh, you just wait how much I'm going to hurt you. And we have this tendency to hurt people back more than they hurt us. And so God here is actually teaching them to be gracious. Look, if they take your thumb, take their thumb. If they take your eye, take their eye. But don't take both eyes and an ear, because you're so angry. So be fair about it. I mean, they're obviously taking something from you, so you have a right to take that from them. Now the laws of retribution as regarded to masters and servants, verse 26. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. So now if a master does this, whether it's intent or not, I don't know, it doesn't say here, but if he does this, then that, pass go, you get to go home right away, free from slavery. Again, that's grace and mercy. And if he knocks out a tooth with his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. So, down to the little details. My master broke my tooth. You're standing before the judge and you're missing a tooth. Okay, did you hit him? Yeah, I got angry. Okay, he's free. He can go home now. He's no longer serving you. And you need to deal with that anger because you've got an anger issue and you can't treat servants that way. And God just bringing that order again. Now animal control, because we all own animals. Pit bulls, Rottweilers, horses. You know, they're in our land and property, and some have a tendency of jumping fences. Some have a tendency of digging under the fence, you know, and doing things that they shouldn't be doing. I had a little, they have 2 little dogs there, and they assured me they're very, very nice. So I went over there the other day to say, and one of them jumped at me and bit me right in the leg. I was able to move away, that it didn't grab me, but I felt the teeth. I'm like, they're not very nice, you know. So we just have to be careful not to let the kids go over there because they're chained up and so forth. That's what it's talking about, right? That's exactly what it's talking about here. That it's your animal, you have responsibility for that animal, and you need to take care of that animal, and you need to take care of whatever that animal destroys, and it's not yours. If an ox gorges a man or a woman to death, then the ox surely shall be stoned, and its flesh shall be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. So you got to destroy the animal. And I guess that's for safety reasons and to keep them from hurting anyone else. But if the ox tends to thrust with his horns in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has kept it confined so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. So if he knew it, right? And he knew that this animal was dangerous, and yet he told people, no, it's not dangerous. You can go in there. Sometimes when I worked for Edison, I would oftentimes go into people's backyards. We had the right to do that. When you actually sign up for electricity, you sign a waiver saying that Edison's personnel can go in your backyard and maintain their property, their meters and so forth. So people are always telling me, oh, my dog's fine, don't worry, it's not going to bite, you know. I'm always asking, do you have dogs? Do you have dogs? I never believe them because they always bite strangers. It's just family members, they don't. And I remember going into this one yard. I said, do you have any dogs? She goes, no, don't have any dogs at all. All right, so shake the gate, you know, make sure they're telling the truth, and I walk in there. And so I'm doing my job. And all of a sudden, something bit me right on the cheek here, just boom, and I'm like, ah! And I looked down, it was their little kid. You didn't tell me you had a little kid that bites. Took a nice bite out of me. I'm like, I cannot believe I got bit by a little kid. Never been bit by a dog, but I got bit by a kid. Now, if the parents knew that that kid would do that, they should have gotten rid of that kid. It only pertains to animals. Verse 29, but if the ox tended to thrust with his horns in times past. Oh, I read that already, didn't I? It should be stoned, of course, with the owner too. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life, whatever is imposed on him. So he had the opportunity to redeem his life if he could pay for money. So that was a choice, I believe, of the person. Well, why don't you give me $1 million and we'll just call it even, and you won't die. Whether it is gored or a son, gored or a daughter, according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gourds a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. Interesting there, the first time that it's mentioned, 30 shekels of silver. The shekels of silver, this is the price of a slave, right? Mm-hmm. And this is pointing to Jesus Christ, who will be sold for 30 pieces of silver. Then we close with more laws giving the principle of neglect and restitution. If a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. If one man's ox hurts another so that he dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it. And the dead ox they shall also divide, or if it was known that the ox treaded or thrusted in times past, and its owner had not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for an ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. So, again, the details, right? So if the animal does this, if the animal does that, if it kills your animal, then okay, you can sell that animal, you split the cost of that animal and so forth. I mean, just thinking, what would God do here? What would be fair? We're dealing with humanity here, with people, dealing with one another. I don't know how many times in the past, right, Fred, we've had people out here in the parking lot and someone hits someone else. You know, and so it's always interesting because I just kind of sit back. I don't say anything, I sit back like, I wonder what's going to happen. How are they going to treat each other? Give me your insurance policy, or don't worry about it. You know, it wasn't a big deal. Or my insurance will take care of it. You know, those type of things that we all run into. And let me give you the heart of God, because this is the heart of God, that we would take the hurt when it comes to our relationships with one another. Even though that hurt would hurt, and it might be humiliating, the person would get away with something, but you would bring honor to God. And then you'd bring more honor if that other person would say, not a problem, I'm going to take care of that. You know, even though it was difficulty. Working with one another as neighbors is so important to the Lord Jesus Christ. And we need to work through those things and not allow situations around us to destroy us, because that's what it does. It destroys us. And especially churches. When church people can't get along, when they can't live the Christian life, and dealing with issues like these in the church, churches are going to grow. It's going to continually be divided. And we need people that are mature, that are willing to be obedient to God's word and apply it even if they're hurt. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, Lord. Very challenging scriptures here, Father, for us, especially in the day that we live, Father.
Yes, Lord.
And how we deal with one another, Lord. How we deal with the salesperson that calls on the phone every other day trying to sell you something. Lord, these are the little things that really show you where your heart is at. Forgive us, Father, and help us, Lord, to truly love our neighbors as we love ourselves, Lord God. As Jesus said very clearly, Lord God, that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, souls, and our mind. And we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Help us, Lord. Help us, Lord, to do that through the power of your Holy Spirit. Lord, not so that we can say, I do that. But, Lord, as you said, they will know that you are my disciples by the love you have one for another. It's about the witness that it brings to God in this dying world. And we need more of a witness today than ever before, Lord. We need your help, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you guys. Yeah. Have a good night.
What did the mom say after the child bit you?
Huh?
What did the mom say after the child bit you?
Oh, I'm sorry. After the child bit me, I'm sorry. That's never happened before. Usually my child don't bite. Like, yeah, right, lady.